speaker is on a tight schedule today, so thank you all for coming. Also want to let you know we will be filming his presentation as we have a number of board members away at either the Y annual meeting or in Europe and other commitments, so we are going to have this available for them. So we're going to get right to our speaker, Dan Hodge, and do the rest of the agenda after. Dan has been working on a project with the Chamber to evaluate possible economic uses for the fairgrounds. So welcome, Dan, and get out of your way.
Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. A lot of familiar faces. I don't know everyone, but I will launch in, and please don't be shy if you have questions as I go. It's a way that I will know you're listening to what I'm presenting. So happy to be here today. I think most people understand at least the broad context of the presentation, but what I'd like to do today is I'm going to go over some of the study objectives as we have spent a lot of time over the past 4 or 5 months looking kind of deep into the fairgrounds, both its existing site conditions and some market analysis of what could be there. Then go in a little bit deeper into redevelopment options that we considered, the ones that we think are most promising, and talk through some potential next steps. I guess I'll actually start with the second bullet here. As I'm guessing everyone in this room knows, the site, was the focus, the target of a proposed resort casino. That plan was rejected earlier this year by the Mass Gaming Commission. However, there's a number of uncertainties and legal challenges that are lingering in Taunton for that casino, which sort of leaves the door open still. And I saw an article actually just in, I think it was the Taunton Gazette from Friday, that talked about and actually quoted the property owner, George Carney, discussing how he thinks that there still is a chance that the resort casino may become an option again. So as sort of some background, we wanted to take a good look at the site to see, okay, if it doesn't end up being a casino, what are some reuse options? But in the news, we know that these challenges exist in Taunton, and so that resort casino idea is not off the table. It's still kind of a potential. I guess that's the best way I can say it right now. The full site is about 65 acres. It has pretty good access to Route 24. In a lot of ways, we think it is a unique asset in the city with the potential for greater economic and revenue contribution to both the city and the region. The objective here was to conduct a market analysis of the site's strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities for redevelopment in the case that it does not go forward as a casino. We want to inform the Chamber, the city, and other partners about potential next steps and opportunities that can be pursued. In a lot of ways, underlying these redevelopment options is this goal to look at how the site could potentially provide greater levels of economic value, jobs, and property tax revenue. I think it's widely understood that it's a underutilized site, has been for a number of years. I'll get to some of that in a moment. Just for context, again, is everyone somewhat familiar with the site? Okay. So I'm guessing most people think of it as they're driving along 123 and potentially along Forest Ave down here. I think less commonly thought of is the eastern edge of the site along Thurber Avenue and the residential neighborhoods that are just to the east there. And I'll just clarify that the resort casino proposal was going to use 45 acres of this site. And I think it was sort of leaving some of the existing office type activity in place. If you take the full site, that's how you get up to the 65 acres. Within that area, there are 6 different actual parcels, And so I was able to get the assessment data for the individual parcels. This 45.5 acre site, that's the core of what the resort casino proposal was. That is under a use code called charitable, which means that it's tax exempt. There is a sort of, I don't know, I'll just say that the property owner pays the city $50,000 per year relative to that particular parcel. Here you can see that the property taxes that are paid on the other parcels there, a couple of them are zoned as general office, a couple of others are just zoned as vacant and developable. The total is about $370,000 for the full site. I think it's easy to see that if you got a full sort of economic value from the 45 acres, you would get a lot higher revenue. So just sort of a summary of the site's attributes. It is a large site. It's owned by a single private party. So from an economic development perspective, that's actually a good thing. It simplifies thinking about land assembly. A lot of places in Massachusetts, when you're thinking about big projects, it's many different owners and it's hard to assemble the land. At the same time, it's important to recognize that there is a private owner of this site, and the city does not have any kind of control or right of first refusal on what happens at the site other than the zoning. And so any of these ideas would ultimately either have to be done in collaboration with the current property owner or other sorts of policy mechanisms that we can get into. The site's about 1.5 miles from downtown, about 1 mile from Route 24. Surrounding uses, sort of a mix of retail and local services along Belmont Street and Forest Ave. I talked about the residential on the eastern edge with Thurber Ave. It's also near Campanelli Stadium and Brockton High School. And I think that proximity to Campanelli was one of the reasons that sort of different kinds of entertainment and athletic type uses has been mentioned at times. It's a very flat site with good infrastructure, water, sewer, telecommunications. No wetlands. That was one of the findings from the casino project. So it's 65 acres, and as far as we can tell, it's virtually all developable, which is often not the case when you're talking about larger sites. There is some transit access, the Route 3 bus along Belmont Street. On the other hand, commuter rail is not really walkable in a conventional sense from the site. And then there are a number of different improvements on 123, in particular from Route 24 towards the site, that are being implemented over time. So just jumping into some of the data and trying to kind of put some of the pieces together about what some reuse options might be. This is looking at the share of jobs by industry for Brockton, which is in blue. The metropolitan area, which is really kind of the workforce area that surrounds Brockton, and then the state overall. By far the largest category here is healthcare and social assistance. That's a big category for the state, but it at this point is really dominating the employment of the city. And that's a mix of healthcare as you typically think of it, hospitals and other kind of healthcare providers, but it also includes this category called social assistance, which in a lot of the state's gateway cities is a fairly big employer. Often has to, it's a number of organizations that are often helping some of the lower income kind of groups within the city. Let's see, just sort of scrolling through, retail trade, relatively high. I think that's partly related to Westgate Mall. And you can see some categories are fairly low, like finance is pretty low, professional and business services is relatively low. That is a category that is a huge strength of the kind of core Boston market, and part of the reason that economy is just so strong is that so many of those professional service jobs, which tend to pay really high wages, it also includes the biotech, like R&D type activity. So that's kind of an area that places like Brockton, and frankly any place, would like to have a bigger share of that. Manufacturing, it's certainly, it's still there, and there's a lot of evidence of competitive manufacturing firms that are still in the economy, but it's certainly a smaller share of the economy than it used to be. Now, one of the things that I found interesting is I was able to get from Mass Development some CoStar real estate data, looking at the industrial markets for the broad Boston sort of metro area, which includes Brockton. It's kind of the big definition of the metro area, as well as a sort of a subset, which is this Route 128 South industrial market. And what you see over time, the blue trend here, that's the vacancy rate in industrial properties. So the vacancy rate has been going down from about 12 down to about 7 over about a 10-year period. Meanwhile, net absorption, which is how much more occupied space in industrial properties do you have, has been going up pretty steadily. There was a little drop in 2009, that's the recession, but going steadily up. And you see a similar kind of trend in the sort of more micro market here, with the vacancy rate going down and net absorption generally going up. So from an industrial market standpoint, and that includes manufacturing, distribution, and other kinds of uses, there's actually quite a bit of use still happening, demand there. We also took a look at the retail market, and with some help from Pat and the Old Colony Planning Council, we were able to get some data looking at the retail market within 5, 10, 15-minute drive times of the fairgrounds site. And one of the things, I guess at a high level, that we see is some evidence of a retail market opportunity in the immediate area. That's the 5-minute, and these numbers in black means that the demand for goods and services, retail goods, exceeds supply. You can see a lot of that is a gap in food and drinking establishments. However, when you go out to 10 minutes or 15 minutes, that gap disappears and flips. And what I think is happening in particular is that within 10 minutes you can get to the Westgate Mall and obviously some other kinds of retail and establishments. That said, there are some subcategories that look like they could still be opportunities, including full-service restaurants, electronics, appliances, a couple of others. But in general, I would say, not the strongest retail kind of market demand in terms of what already exists in the demand locally. As part of this work, while I did a fair amount of data work, I did a lot of interviewing too, with a mix of both public and nonprofit and private developers. This is just a list. Chris, did the full report go out to the group? Okay, so virtually everything you're seeing is in the full report. This list is in the report. So spent a fair amount of time talking to different people who know Brockton, who know the region, trying to get their ideas on reuse opportunities. And so in the report, there's a pretty long section that goes through findings from those interviews. I'm not today, in the interest of time, going to sort of walk you through all of that. I'm going to jump towards the redevelopment options that we assessed. So in the report, there's a lot more there, of course. I'm a consultant, I can't write too short of a report, right? So I guess in terms of the ones that we assessed or took a closer look at, the top two, so having a retail-focused redevelopment or a residential-focused redevelopment, those were two that we talked about quite a bit. Those were two that frankly did not rise up to the top. The other ones that we're going to talk about are the ones that seem like they have a little bit more potential, partly from an economic basis, an economic job basis, and partly, there were multiple developers and others who just sort of, when thinking about the fairgrounds, just did not see that site as being a full-on residential play. I think, as we're going to talk about it a little bit later, there are some ways that you could have residential on that site, but to have like the entire thing be residential did not sort of, like I say, rise to the top. And similarly with the retail, the market just didn't seem strong enough to have that be a, full-on kind of retail play, especially if one of your goals is more jobs, more tax revenue, and really some higher paying jobs, which retail tends to have lower paying. So I'm going to walk through each of these now, and these are really, I guess, the kinds of redevelopment options that the report recommends be considered in more detail moving forward. Revised resort casino plan. So, as I was saying at the beginning, the option of a resort casino is still, it hasn't totally faded away, right? So there is this uncertainty there. It's still the preferred reuse by the property owner, and it seems to be that by the city as well. I think that if that opportunity does arise or come back, the city and the development team would be wise to, in particular, address some of the feedback that came from the Gaming Commission, as well as trying to even increase the economic opportunities further than what was there. That could mean including the full 65 acres rather than the 45. Potential inclusion of horse racing. That was one idea, one comment that the Gaming Commission came back with was, I think, a little bit of surprise that the horse racing was completely gone. Now, I think that would have to take a lot of careful thought because the horse racing industry in general, I think, is on a decline. So I'm not sitting here recommending Brockton needs to do horse racing, but it was a comment from the Gaming Commission, so it's worth at least thinking through. Enhancing the physical integration with the surrounding area, that was one of the critiques of the plan, was that it was kind of an island unto itself and didn't integrate as well, whether that's sidewalks or signage or other kinds of things. Increasing space for some different uses, and then reassessing the building design for the wow factor. I think that it just did not in any way overwhelm the Gaming Commission when that plan was put together. So I guess the bottom line is that I think if that opportunity comes back around, the city, the development team would be wise to, kind of take a fresh look at what they propose and what perhaps could be improved. So, if that casino option fades away, which it certainly could, there's in essence kind of three reuse options that we took kind of a closer look at that I think are worth kind of talking through a little bit. So one is to create a technology kind of business park. So take the 65 acres, develop a business park with a mix of different uses. That could include light industrial, could include biomanufacturing, some back office, R&D. In a lot of ways, this was I think the preferred option from a lot of the developers and economic development officials that I spoke to. And I think a lot of what drove that idea was that if you were successful in that kind of venture, it's likely to have the biggest job and revenue impact at the site. And there are signs of the industrial market doing well, and taking a look at other regional industrial parks, and there's actually a lot of them. I think everyone knows one or two, maybe Miles Standish in Taunton or Easton's Industrial Park, but there's a lot of them, and they're generally doing quite well. And one of the big advantages that Brockton has over, say, Easton is really strong water sewer assets, which some of the other places do not have, and it's really limiting growth in some other places. So if you were going to go with this, it could have substantial impacts, but it also would take some real vision, time, and cost to implement. This wouldn't happen overnight. It would need to be a well-designed facility, a place where businesses want to locate. That was one of the points of emphasis from the work is, whether it's landscaping or promotion or what have you, really to create a place where a range of businesses want to be. Allow for some flexible uses. There are likely to be some biomanufacturing opportunities over time, but I would never suggest you put all your eggs in that one basket. And so you do want to be somewhat flexible. Some rough estimates were that it could generate up to, at build-out, 1.3 million square feet of development, up to 25 businesses, 600 to 800 jobs. This is, can support a significant amount of activity if you did that full build-out. You likely would need access to some state funds, I suspect, for some pre-development work and infrastructure. But there are programs that exist, and as a gateway city, Brockton's in a relatively good position for that. So that's an option that's put forward in the report. Another one that came up quite a bit was doing some sort of athletic complex on the site, but then mixing in some other uses as well. So part of the idea is, looking around, there's Four Kicks in Taunton. Over in Northborough, there's a baseball complex. In Attleboro, there's a big project, the New England Sports Village, that's happening. There's a lot of demand, whether it's indoor soccer or other kinds of athletic uses. So that's one option. One of the strengths, I think, of that option is that at the largest it would be 25 to 30 acres, and it could easily be less than that, so you could still have room for other uses. Potentially including like residential along Thurber Ave. It certainly would have less jobs and tax revenue than a more business park oriented proposal. And in terms of sort of generating spin-off activity, athletic complexes typically aren't that strong. It's usually a fairly modest spin-off boost as a lot of the people who are coming are literally coming to play an event during the day, during the evening, and then go home. So, yes, there might be some tournaments and other things that might generate some hotel or restaurant activity, but I think it's relatively modest on that side. This kind of thing could be privately developed, generating some tax revenues. And they can exist near virtually any type of use. I happen to play indoor soccer myself, and I play at an indoor soccer facility that is on a fairground site in Northampton, Mass. So they can be just about anywhere. So that's one, another use. I sort of think of it almost as a less expensive kind of backup type option. A third option that we looked at for redevelopment that I think is pretty intriguing, I'm calling it a hybrid redevelopment option with some residential, but also trying to make available new sites for business. The focus on the residential would be, in particular, along that eastern edge of the site, along Thurber Ave. And the idea is largely to mirror the residential uses that exist on what's, I guess, the east side of Thurber Ave. And you could put in, we think up to about 30 to 40 single-family houses. The housing market seems to be a little bit stronger as you're closer to 24. And so that's sort of an intriguing, potential reuse of that part of the site. It could provide some near-term revenue for the property owner. At the same time, depending on how you structured it, you could still retain 30 to 45 acres for business development of other parts of the site, and the parts of the site that have the best roadway access along 123 and Forest Ave. One of the advantages here is that if you limited the physical size of the business park, that could reduce the upfront infrastructure and redevelopment costs. And it could be a more practical type option, recognizing the current property owner's sort of assets and interests. This kind of thing would likely have to be sort of a negotiation of some sort between the city and the owner in terms of how you structure the site. On the downside, doing a smaller scale site for businesses, that limits those estimates of how many businesses could locate, what scale of businesses might be interested, if you were really dealing with, only 35 acres as opposed to 65. So, and then I guess I'll wrap up and then we'll take some questions. I hope I'm not going too fast here. Some potential next steps and considerations. We've got this report, I guess, finished or basically finished. It can be communicated. We're going to, I think, try to work with some different partners moving forward. Try to hone in on that short list of redevelopment options and try to work towards some shared vision about the site. Now that we have this document, and we have engaged state leaders to some extent. That's the Executive Office of Housing and Economic Development. So we did speak with Secretary Ash about the site. We have spoken a couple times with Mass Development about the site. And they could be a key partner in helping to push something forward. Determining the city's preferred approach with working with the property owner. Like on the one hand, the city could be very passive and sort of see what happens over time. On the flip of that, the city could work towards something called an interim planning overlay district. That's a more aggressive move where the city would be looking to, in essence, over a period of time, about 2 years, the city would then have sort of control over reuse. It's not, as you might guess, necessarily a favored approach by property owners. So thinking about how the city, does this or works with the property owner moving forward is important. Ultimately, I think we're going to want to look towards some master planning for the site and maybe some visual depictions of reuse options. That wasn't something we were able to do in this particular project, but I think being able to better visualize how this might lay out could be helpful. And then finally, just determining some of the policy steps based on preferred uses. So there's, this might take rezoning. This might take, or could benefit from this program called 43D, which is an expedited permitting sort of designation. So there's some different sort of policy levers that could be used too. So I will wrap up there and I guess invite questions.
Did your analysis include review of roadway traffic pattern, capacity of the roads for volumes?
Yeah, we looked at that, and Pat and his team had provided data on traffic volumes. I think that implicit in those technology business park uses is the idea that it's not a good site for like a big distribution center with like lots of trucks coming in and out. So I specifically made the choice not to recommend that use. A lot of the light industrial and even biomanufacturing, they have some trucking, but it's at a relatively modest scale typically, and they're often not, the big 18-wheelers. So, I think, my sense, and Pat, I'd be interested what you think, is that, there's capacity for more, but I wouldn't want to, just throw, hundreds of trucks onto the road either.
Yeah, I think with the new improvements that are being done on Belmont Street, they should be able to handle the additional capacity there.
Other questions or thoughts? Yeah.
So, in your list of interviews conducted, I noticed that you interviewed with the president of a company called Co-Bio Consulting.
Yes.
Are they in the area now, or?
So it's a guy who is a expert in the area of sort of biotech development. He used to work for, I believe, Mass Bio. And so he's worked with areas and communities and universities all over the state in thinking about, different types of biotech projects. So it was largely to get a deeper understanding, about what, if any, kind of biotech opportunities might make sense at the site. And in essence, what he said was, You know, probably not so much on a pure R&D basis. That's really concentrated first and foremost in the Boston-Cambridge area, and then radiating out a little bit, and if anything, going north. He frankly just didn't see that as a strong play for this kind of site. But we did talk quite a bit about some of the different sort of life science research efforts that are resulting in sort of smaller batch biomanufacturing, and companies that may employ 50 to 100 people, need a site of 5 to 10 acres, and he thought that this site, could be competitive in that kind of field. But, and this is, with my comment from before, there's only so many of those projects a year, you can count them on your hand kind of thing, and so, you may be able to land that type of company, but you probably don't want your business plan to be contingent on it. Yep.
I guess I would just, just based on what you presented here, and some familiarity of what's been happening in Brockton over the years, I think the hybrid idea is interesting. You mentioned the houses. I think that would be something you could do to create some momentum there. And for example, if you just snapped your fingers and there was an office building there, whether it would get tenants right away or not, I think it's hard to say. I think you mentioned you could be quite confident that if you were building the houses that they'd sell quickly, maybe that would give the owner a little bit more capital, and maybe could spruce the site up a bit, create some separation, and then, for the remaining, you estimate you're going to use about a third of the land for the remaining acreage. I would think you'd have to be very flexible, and it would be any number of things. Whether an office park would work there.
Yeah, and I didn't even get into the office market too much, and largely because the office market as a sort of pure office play just is not that strong. That was one of the things through the interview findings and other kind of research. So I mentioned back office, but sort of to your point, I wouldn't think you'd want to just develop a bunch of offices and build it and hope they'll come.
Right, and I mean, if you did the residential piece, I don't know a lot about the sports facility market, but I mean, that seems like it would be a home run. And then, from there you effectively utilize 2/3 of the acreage, and then maybe from there is enough for whatever type of office, or I don't know, maybe there's some sort of healthcare option as well.
Yeah.
Just thinking out loud.
Sure. No, thanks.
This is very interesting, thank you. And at one point, I was listening to Mr. Curry, the property owner, talk, about the casino. And one of the comments he made, and I'm wondering, I like when you talk about the preferred approach, working with the property owner probably to maximize, what you put in front of us.
Yep.
But I remember him saying something about he was being approached by a super Walmart. I don't know if I just heard that somewhere along the line.
He said that a few times.
So are there other things, which to me is like,
Yeah. So, I think underlying this, and I sort of skipped over it, but, if the city and partners were able to kind of work with the property owner on this hybrid option, and you could potentially say, all right, you do this residential, maybe you keep some of the office, but let's negotiate it so that maybe we get control over some other aspects, because what I think you really want to avoid is this sort of haphazard development that might occur otherwise, and reuses that are big space, but not great from an economic development standpoint. And Walmart might want to go there, or some other retail company, but that's going to be more challenging in terms of adding to your economic base.